Hello, my friends. Thought I'd make you a little help video to go with the 3.06 assignment. I think this is one of those assignments that sounds really hard, and then when you get into it, you realize it's not that bad at all. So, let's go ahead and dive in. And I thought this was kind of a funny example of behaviorism, because when he fails to remember his information, it'll help him to remember it. So I thought that was kind of a clever way to get around forgetting. All right. So for my students who are working on the 3.06 assignment, the question is, what do I need to do? And so the assignment says that congratulations, thanks to your study of behaviorism and memory techniques, GCA has decided that you are the person who should present to the 8th grade students on how to survive high school. And you need to talk to Herbie's 8th grade homeroom. Look, Herbie's back. About memory techniques, using behavioral learning like conditioning or social cognitive theory, and how to overcome forgetting. So your goal is when you walk out of there that Herbie and his homeroom buddies will be rock star students when they are done. And you can share this information as a PowerPoint presentation, a flyer, a video, whatever would appeal to you, a TED Talk, a podcast. I just encourage you not to make it a dry, boring essay, okay? Maybe try to just make it a little more interesting than that. So you can include lots of information, but it needs to be about learning from behavioral view. So we're not looking, there are some tips or tricks that may not actually be part of the behavioral view that wouldn't be the ones you want to include in your 5. But if you want to include something that I don't have in this presentation, if you can relate it to the material from Unit 3, so sorry, by all means, please do. But you need to have 5 tips. They need to relate to the material in Unit 3. And like I said, you need to make the format interesting in how you present it. So the first thing we'll talk about is classical conditioning. And classical conditioning, as you probably remember, has to do with involuntary learning. Things that are reflexes. Things that we do not because someone has taught us to do them, but because it's just what we do. For example, whenever I smell chocolate, just in case you're wondering what I'm showing you, this is a candle that I broke the glass on, so I stuck it in an old mug. So whenever I smell chocolate, I'm in a much better mood. It's just involuntary. I love the smell of chocolate. Yeah, I needed one more. It makes me happy. Okay, so no one taught me to be happy when I tasted or smelled chocolate. It just happens. That's involuntary. And for me, that's an unconditioned stimulus, an unlearned stimulus. So I can pair a neutral stimulus, or maybe a stimulus that I don't quite have the right attitude towards, let's say like studying for a test, with that unconditioned stimulus. Okay, and over time, if I continuously pair it, so I always present the candle when I'm studying, so every single time, so my unconditioned stimulus, my candle, is always presented when I'm studying. And over time, I should learn to acquire that same happiness I have for the candle that should transfer to the studying, or at least less discontent, let's say. So that's something that you want to think about. How could you use classical conditioning to help yourself become a better student? Because ultimately, that's the goal of every one of these questions. I'm just going to sit here and sniff my candle all day. All right, now, operant conditioning. What does operant conditioning look at in terms of learning? Well, if classical conditioning looks at the involuntary responses I give, operant conditioning looks at the voluntary responses I give. You know, for example, I have a choice. I can choose to look at my phone or not look at my phone, right? That is a choice. I know it doesn't always feel like it, but really it is. It's a choice. Just go with me here. So according to operant conditioning, learning has to do with the consequences that follow my choice, my behavior, and they determine whether I'm likely to repeat the behavior. So if I want that behavior repeated, it should be reinforced. If I want that behavior decreased, it should be punished. So what does that mean as a student? Well, sometimes it's kind of hard to find the motivation to study for a test, right? But what if I were to give myself a reward? If I study for my test for 45 minutes, I'll take a 10-minute brain break and I get to play on my phone. 45 more minutes, another 10-minute brain break. Okay, so that's a reward. I'm going to increase my desired behavior, which is studying. But what happens if I don't study? Like maybe I study. You know what I mean? Like I just kind of, I'm going to go check, my Snapchat or whatever and see what's going on. Oh, I think I'll call my friend. I'm not really studying, right? So maybe I need a punishment. Maybe I don't get it back for the rest of the night, or maybe for an hour I can't touch my phone. So I'm thinking about the behavior I want to increase as a student, whether it's studying or focusing on my schoolwork or, attending a help session. And then I'm thinking about ways to increase it. For example, maybe you're somebody who doesn't like to do help sessions, but you really need them. Maybe for every help session you attend, you get 10 minutes of playing a video game. That would be a reward, right? So these are things you can think about in terms of how would they help a student. And then, of course, last but not least, social cognitive theory. Oh, it looks like I have some formatting on this slide that I wasn't expecting. Sorry about that. Okay, and as we recall, we know that there's two types of learning in social cognitive theory. There's enactive learning, which is learning by doing and experiencing the consequences of your actions. And there's vicarious learning, which is learning by observing others. And that's really key because sometimes it helps to have someone to study with, right? It helps to have someone to work with. And it helps to be able to kind of look at the consequences of the actions they take. So if they get a good grade, okay, well, what did you do to get that good grade? We can reflect, well, what am I not doing that's not getting me the good grade, but that person's doing and I'm not? And then we can regulate our performance standards. Well, you know what? She studies and she takes 10-minute brain breaks and she really focuses. Maybe I need to do that. Maybe she and I should study together because I will be able to vicariously gain some of her habits. So how about if we need to get that short-term memory into long-term memory? What are some ways we can do it? These are some other tips. So we just talked about the 3 ways learning could be used, and those are 3 tips you could use. You could use one on classical, one on operant, one on social cognitive. But now let's talk about what kind of memory helps could you use? So mnemonics. Great things. Mnemonic devices are basically any kind of device or trick that you can use to help get information into your head. Like Roy G. Biv, the colors of the rainbow, the red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, although, interestingly enough, indigo is not actually a real color. It was just created because the gentleman who created that really wanted there to be 7 colors in the rainbow, apparently. Or PEMDAS. I'm sure you've heard that one, parentheses, exponents, multiply, divide, add, subtract, the order of operations in a function. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. That's another mnemonic. Just any trick, making the information into a song so you can sing it, making it rhyme. Maybe you make like a beat and you say the information to the beat. These are all mnemonic devices. Just any device, any method you can use to get that information into your brain. Sometimes what we want to do is chunking. Chunking is where we take, let's say you're studying for, I don't know, a psychology IA1, and you're thinking, oh my gosh, I'm never going to get all this information crammed into my head, which of course is not what we want to do because that's not good learning. But I digress. You could break it down. You know what? Today I'm going to look at chapter 1. I'm just going to focus on that. And I'm going to take my notes and I'm going to simplify them. Maybe I'm going to rewrite them so that I paraphrase it. That'll help get it in my head. But maybe I'm going to take my notes and color code them. So chunking is just different ways of breaking down the information into more manageable units so you feel more comfortable with it. We do this all the time with telephone numbers. We do the area code first, 404, then the prefix, 334, then the last 4 numbers, 4790. and that's another way to chunk. Okay, this just helps us keep more information in our heads at a time. And then, of course, there is rehearsal. That's what we need to move short-term memory to long-term memory. And it's as simple as just saying it over and over again. Rehearsal is what we need to move short-term memory to long-term memory. Rehearsal is what we need to move short-term memory to long-term memory. We can do that. Or maybe you watch a video about the information, and then you take an online quiz about the information, and then maybe you play a Kahoot about the information, so you're just repeating it over and over again. So rehearsal, not just for music groups and plays, but it's also the way you get that information into long-term memory. And it's really important to consider the context. So one thing you might want to remind your students is that what mental state you were in when you learned the memory is the same mental state you should be in when you need to put the memory back onto the paper, basically. And this is where things like classical conditioning can really come in. Because, for example, of course I have my candle, but one of my students was telling me how every time she studies, she chews a stick of mint gum. And when she takes the test, she also chews the mint gum. And that flavor helps her have that cue or that mental state that gets her prepared to take the test. Another idea here, as our poor Al is demonstrating, is caffeine. If you drink a whole bunch of caffeine while you're studying, you need to drink caffeine before you take the test. You can also talk about cues, making those sensory link to the information, like the mint gum, or drawing a picture to help link the information. And then your context, your sensory link to a location. Where are you going to take the test? Are you going to take it at your desk? Then study at your desk. Build those cues in, because you're kind of unconsciously look around as you're studying, and you're not even going to realize you're building those visual cues in as you're studying, or you're building in those auditory cues depending on where you are. And this is all very classically conditioned. This is all very involuntary that you're playing upon here, involuntary responses. All right, this is not something I taught in class, but it's kind of interesting, so I thought I'd throw it in. When you look at a list, you tend to remember the things at the beginning of the list more than the middle or the end. So one of the things I often suggest to students is to make a list of what you need to know and make sure to put the things you're least familiar with at the front, because you're more likely to remember that as you go. So what causes forgetting? Maybe you want to address that. That is a great point. And it's really important that if you address forgetting, you don't just talk about stress and how you have to relax. You need to explain that you do this because you do not want to forget. So as I just mentioned, stress is the #1 reason why we forget things, some kind of mental stress. And I don't mean like, oh my gosh, end of the world stress. It's very simple. Let's say that you see a friend on the street and you're like, oh, I remember, so-and-so, yeah, they were in class and the name is, I can't remember the name. That happens to me all the time. I know I'm probably not alone there. So that tip of the tongue syndrome, there's a stress block that just prevents that name from coming to me. And as soon as I can get that stress blocks to go away by relaxing, I can get the information out. And there's some great things I could do. For example, I'll often tell students, hey, stand up and walk around. Like, let's say you're taking the test at the kitchen table. Just stand up and walk around the kitchen table twice. Or do some stretches, or do some squats, just for like a minute, not for like an hour, and then go right back to the test. And you might be surprised to find out that that stress block is gone because you took your focus off it. So if you want to talk about forgetting, make sure and you want to talk about stress, make sure you talk about how, stress can lead you to forget, and that's why you would want to stay relaxed when you're testing. All right, and some different tips that you can consider. Oh, I didn't mean to put the slide in. Let me skip past that. So what you want to do now, you want to think about these tips we've talked about, and here we go. Here I've sort of listed them out for you, some of them. Pick 5. What 5 interest you? You don't need to do everything I've talked about. I've talked about way more than 5. So pick the 5 that interest you and make your assignment. Like I said, your format is up to you, but you want to make it interesting. You don't want to make it something kind of boring. Turn it in to me, and I look forward to if you have all, well, let me back up here. Each tip is worth up to 3 points, so that's 5 points each, and then the appearance and grammar is worth 3 points. Now, I want to let you know that in terms of appearance and grammar, if I see that you made an effort to make it interesting and I can understand what you wrote, then you're going to get the points. The only time I take things off is if it's either really no attempt was made to make it very interesting, or sometimes I do get projects where I cannot figure out what the person's saying to me at all, and I might take some points off there. But I always try to let my students have a second chance so that they can bring up their grade. So don't worry about that. But basically, those are the things I'm looking for. So put that together and you will have a great project. And if you have any questions, please let me know. But hopefully this video helps you feel a little more comfortable about what you're doing.